Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to the 2025 annual named lecture, which the Flight Simulation Group holds in the name of Edwin A. Link, the founder of Flight Simulation. This is Edwin A. Link next to his famous blue box, and you might, looking at the ceiling up there, recognize he's actually in this building. He was here at the very first Flight Simulation Symposium that was held in 1973. I wasn't attending that one, I didn't organize that one. That's Ed. Ed is going to be talked about a little bit more in the presentation that we're going to have from my two esteemed colleagues, Neil Waterman and Jeremy Goodman. I was going to give them a really big build-up and introduction, but they said they're going to talk about themselves in their presentation, which they do in normal life anyway. And you'll also notice they're not themselves tonight, they've put ties on. So before I embarrass them any further, one more little thing. You will be asked very shortly to use your phone to vote for something on Slido. So please keep it on silent, but if you turned it off, I suggest you turn it back on again to participate in the first part of tonight's presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy and Neil.
So we thought we would start with a question on Slido, one at the front of the lecture and one at the back. And this one is, if you can use that QR code to get onto Slido, or type slido.com into your browser and then use that number, that number, you will see there's various sections. Select the Ed Link lecture section and please answer the question. And while you're doing that, Neil and I will introduce ourselves.
Good evening. Yes, hi, I'm Neil Waterman. I'm the Commercial Aviation Director from ASTi, a company out of the US. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what we've been doing as we go through.
My name's Jeremy Goodman, and I've been working not with Neil the whole time, but most recently with Neil. Both of us have been working for over 16 years developing a training technology called simulated ATC environment. So let's take a look at the poll and see what have we got. 36 people responding so far. The question is how familiar are you with simulated ATC environment? And most people, a third, are familiar with the concept and scope. But we do have 19% of us that, well, 18% of us that are nearly an expert. That's excellent. But a similar amount where it's new. So we will start from first principles for you. But no, that's really interesting. Fantastic.
All right. Perfect. So, Mr. Chairman, society members, guests, it's certainly an honour to be able to give this lecture, and one that I hope we can live up to. I guess we'll find out. Over the next 45 minutes or so, I hope we can share with you a story that comes in 3 parts. So, part 1 covers the journey to reach this point. In fact, this very building is central to that story. And we'll also take a short history lesson that I think is going to be quite compelling. In part 2, we'll cover the state of play today and share some of the challenges we've faced in how some parts of our industry might need to change. And also, I think change is not a word we really like in our industry. So we'll take a look at that. And then finally, in part 3, we'll take a look to the future and what we think that's going to bring. And to close, we'll take any questions that you might have. Now, at this point, you quite rightly will be thinking, well, you haven't really told us what we'll be talking about. And on screen, you'll see something that's sometimes referred to as the 3 pillars of aviation. So aviate, which is, in my simplistic view, keep the aircraft in the air or on the ground in a safe attitude away from hard surfaces. Then navigate, we want to point the aircraft where we want it to go. And then finally, communicate, which is the core of what we'll be entertaining you with tonight. And perhaps we'll bring some new considerations, but that part will become self-evident. So how did we get here? So I'm going to lead you through part 1 of this story, And then Jeremy will help me a little bit through that part, and then he's going to take over with part 2 and 3, and I'll join him as supporting cast. So this journey that we're going to describe tonight actually began almost 20 years ago in this very building, give or take a few weeks, November 9th, 2005. Now, this was a day that now I see as pivotal in both my personal career and the company that I work for. So what was Ed Cook from the FAA talking about in his presentation, which was called What Our Mission Should Be? Now, in that, he mentioned something called automated ATC. Now, for now, I'm going to leave that question hanging, but you can be sure we're going to come back to that. So my story, quickly in 30 seconds, before we get to the good stuff. I started my flight simulation career at Singerlink Miles in 1989 and was immediately specialized in communications and sound. And I'm sure some of you in this room recognize the story that follows. Singerlink Miles became Link Miles, that became Thomson CSF, that became TTSL. And then at that point in 1999, I jumped ship and moved over to the USA and found my home at ASTi, where I've been there ever since. ASTi is a small specialist sound communications company supplying to the flight and simulation industry. But I've got 36 years of sound and communications. So what about communications? So when Chris Hunter and the committee invited us to speak tonight, after putting aside a few we're not worthy thoughts, I remember the picture I'd seen several years ago, which is on the left-hand side of the screen. And of course, most of you here will recognize that as a link trainer, as Chris showed us earlier. Or more affectionately, the blue box, invented by none other than the namesake of this lecture. Now, the picture on the right is, again, another blue box in a different setting. But if you're paying attention, both photographs prominently feature the instructor wearing a headset, speaking into a microphone. And while we can't see the student on the right, quite clearly the pilot on the left side is wearing a headset. Now, being curious, and I hadn't really looked at this in any detail, I did a little bit more digging and found the communications functionality for the blue box was actually quite a bit more than I'd anticipated. The crew has a headset and a hand microphone, which I probably expected, but the instructor had much more capability. The instructor has a fairly complex radio control panel, which supported, in addition to simulated radio voice channels, which actually had a ranging adjustment, which I thought was quite interesting. There's also an intercom, navigation aid, Morse, and landing tones being generated by the system. Now, thinking about that and thinking about my experience, that felt horribly familiar. Now, if you look at a modern simulator, you see there's an instructor radio control panel and crews wearing a headset along with the instructor. So what has changed today? Well, on the surface, very little. Communications looks the same. Quite simply, the instructor is still role-playing all the external radio communication, with perhaps the sole exception of ATIS.
So throughout this lecture, we're going to give you 7 takeaways. This is takeaway number 1. And the takeaway is, looking back at the blue box, nothing much changed in very nearly 100 years in simulating ATC and in not simulating traffic.
So what has happened to the external environment over that time, that 100 years or 100 years? Well, even on a simplistic level, more aircraft must equal more threats. And the basic statistics that you see on the screen shows that that traffic threat environment is only going to increase. And bear in mind, this data doesn't include new aircraft types such as eVTOL and things like that. So what have we done to the simulator training environment? Well, anybody who's seen me speak before on this subject will recognize this picture. This is how we represent the rest of the world as far as our simulator is concerned. It's an empty road. Now, This is also how the blue box represented the world. There was no other traffic, there was nothing. But the real world looks like this. The environment is busy, it's filled with threats and challenges. That empty road that we just looked at doesn't exist in the operational world. We need to train as we fly. As aircraft have become more reliable, the operational environment has become more complex. And the main threats are not so much the aircraft itself, which it used to be, but now the safe passage of the aircraft through the crowded airport and airways. And for those events where the aircraft does have a problem, it happens in this environment you see on the screen, not the empty road from the previous slide. We seem to be missing something. So remember this, my earlier slide, automated ATC. What Ed Cook described was in fact much more than just automated ATC. It was an environment for our flight simulators that replicates the busy airport and skies. Also freeing the instructor from the workload of trying to role play something that was becoming increasingly complicated. Automated ATC is what Jeremy and myself have spent the last 20 years developing, trying to bring to reality. So let's just reset a little bit. Automated ATC, that became ATC environments, which ultimately ended up being called SATCE, Simulated ATC Environment. And that's what we're going to cover for the rest of this lecture. So let's look at this simplified view of the cockpit. The external environment today is basically the visual scene and weather, but that leaves a big empty hole. If you put on a headset and look out of the window, what do you get? Nothing. What's missing is ATC and other traffic. The operational environment is only complete when this is accurately represented, and that is now entirely possible. So there's a definition for SATCE. There's several references to SATCE in different standards. You can read what it says on there, but it's a synthetic environment for flight training in which air traffic control services and other traffic entities are simulated. Jeremy, I think this is you.
Thank you. If you're new to SATCE, and that's about a third of us, we think, then this white paper might be of interest to you. It was authored by myself and Mike Varney, Captain Mike Varney, but peer-reviewed by a group of, I think, over 20 people globally. It's a superb starting point. It was really born out of a kind of peak, certainly high-profile incidents that happened early in 2023. And a lot of those were near misses, runway incursions, things like that. But it covers a lot of detail about SATCE, from flight safety right the way through to evidence-based training, or EBT. So a useful resource for newbies, let's say.
So what does SATCE add? Well, SATCE has been available as a product solution since 2016. And what you see on screen is Seattle with SATCE. So those aircraft that you see moving around, and this is just a short loop, obviously speeded up. Those aircraft that you see are not just clutter. They all have a life cycle, a flight plan. And if you just sat back and watched, you would hear and see the aircraft will request their clearance, pushback, taxi, take off, and then conversely arriving aircraft fly the approach, receive landing clearance, and taxi to their arrival gate. So the airport is now alive. The trainee crew will have to fit into this complex scenario. And this is just as they must do in the real world. That empty road that we talked about before is just not meaningful. And if we continue to train that way, we are really doing our crews a disservice. And if we were brave, we might call that negative training. Now, on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see a summary of what SATCE adds and the resulting impact on training. Jeremy will cover some of those in more detail later. So what does SATCE use? How do we build a system? Well, it leverages quite a number of different core AI components, speech recognition, synthetic speech, et cetera, et cetera. You can see that on the screen. I don't want to get stuck on the technology here. This is something that we've been struggling with for nearly 20 years. So it's something we can talk, well, quite a lot about if we need to. I don't think it's helpful at this point, but this is what we're using to build this capability. It's pretty current tech, and I think it's only going to improve. There's advances that are coming quickly and rapidly in this area of technology, and we're leveraging some of those advances. So there's a bright future for this technology. It will only improve from where we are. So perhaps the obvious question is why? Communications are a contributory factor in 70% of aircraft accidents or incidents. So recently the ICAO released the 2025 safety report, and 2 of the 5 global high-risk categories are poorly or barely represented in training that we implement in our simulators today. These include mid-air collision and runway incursions, but we can train these better with SATCE. These are specifically identified as global safety priorities in the ICAO Global Aviation Safety Plan. Now, this has been a long journey, 20 years to get to this point. I find it hard to believe, but if I think back to the first time I walked into a level D flight simulator, which is now 36 years ago, very little has changed regarding the functionality in the full flight simulator itself. The image generator, yes, is vastly and greatly improved. It looks pretty, but the view you see out of the window is really the same view that you would have seen 36 years ago, no matter what was being, whatever the technology was back then that you looked at. The motion system, yes, is electric now, it was hydraulic, it's improved, and the exterior looks nicer. But the core functionality of that simulator 36 years ago that I first looked at is exactly the same. The instructor is role-playing, malfunction list is basically the same. So we can do better. And I'm just going to give you some closing thoughts for part 1. So our simulators are built on standards that were developed from lessons learned in the 60s and 70s. That's a staggering 50 to 60 years in the past, back when the aircraft itself was the primary threat. I think we'd all agree that the aircraft flying today are significantly more reliable. We even have parts of the aircraft that report maintenance issues back to the maintenance facility before the aircraft lands via data link. And conversely to that, the operational environment has grown increasingly more challenging. And of course, we're all aware of reports we see in the news of runway incursions, near misses, ground collisions, and in sometimes more serious. So also we have new global regions that are experiencing massive growth. So while the learning curve is steep there, so we must not allow ourselves to be complacent. And in part 2, we'll lead you through the significant challenges we have faced bringing this technology to the market, and how rolling up a snowball up a hill isn't a lot of fun. And with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Neil. So on to part 2, and we probably crammed too much into this, so apologies. We're going to show you the technology. We're going to show you 2 videos. We're going to talk about the market adoption of SATCE at the moment, touch on some research, and also look at flight safety briefly. So onto the videos. This is the first video. It's 5 minutes long. It is an approach into Washington DCA. It is an RNAV approach that follows the Potomac River down south and to land on runway 19. This video highlights both the ATC threats that we can now simulate, that we couldn't simulate before, and also traffic threats. So the first threat that the crew will experience is ATC giving them a challenge and requesting that they approach on minimum speed. Then the ATC actually gives them a clue, a reason, and they say that's because we've got traffic departing ahead of you. So already, hopefully, the crew are building up situational awareness that there's potentially a threat ahead. Then what happens is ATC, because they're tuned to tower frequency, you can hear ATC clearing traffic ahead of the approaching own ship. But that traffic was 2 issues here. Firstly, ATC is probably a little bit overambitious, trying to get those traffic out. And secondly, the traffic are really very slow, even though they're accepting expedited takeoff. So what we end up with is a traffic on runway 15, which crosses runway 19. Just on the very final approach, you'll see there's a runway incursion. Now, the crew, in using SATCE, can choose to go around whenever they want, and they can tell ATC or not that they're going around, and the system will cope with that. What happens in this video is that they leave it very, very late, and ATC gives them a very late go around, and then they manage the go around. I want you to look out for other traffic on the navigation displays as well, okay, in the full flight level D. So this video comes courtesy of Alaska Airlines. It's their device that the SATCE is integrated into, and they shot it. Oh, here we go.
Alaska 317, proceed direct Derek for the RNAV Zulu runway 19er approach.
Director Derek for the RNAV Zulu to runway 19er, Alaska 317.
Alaska 317, reset transponder, squawk 3014.
3014, Alaska 317.
Alaska 317, cleared for RNAV Zulu runway 19er approach.
Cleared for the RNAV Zulu to runway 19er, Alaska 317. Okay, here for approach.
Alaska 317, contact Washington Tower 119er.1.
119.1, Alaska 317.
So they've now changed over to tower frequency.
Washington Tower, Alaska 317 on the RNAV RMP Zulu to runway 19er.
Alaska 317, Washington Tower, runway 19er, wind 110 at 11, clear to land.
Runway 19er, clear to land, Alaska 317. Okay, clear to land. Clear to land.
Did you notice a new voice on the new frequency?
Clear for takeoff.
Runway 15, clear for takeoff, Delta 456.
Alaska 317, slow approach to minimum speed. I have a couple of departures before arrival.
Slow to minimum approach speed, Alaska 317. Selected. Flaps 30. Selected. Flaps 40. Unchecked. Selected. Speed breaker. Arm green light. Landing gear. Down 3 green. Flaps 40 green light. Heading check.
This is quite an exciting approach, actually.
United 789, Washington Tower, can you do an immediate takeoff?
Affirmative, United 789.
United 789, runway 15, wind 110 at 11, clear for takeoff.
Runway 15, clear for takeoff, United 789.
Yeah, we got it. Now it was clear for takeoff. So, or it looks like they're just taking the runway right now. Okay.
So once that traffic gets airborne, we'll be able to see it on the navigation displays as well. This is the first time you can do this in Flight Simulator.
What's going on? 500 feet, runway 19.
500.
Runway 90.
96, contact Potomac departure, 118.9 or 5.
118.9 or 5, Delta 456.
Minimums.
Runway 90.
Alaska 317, go around.
Alaska 317, go around, Sojo. Flaps 50, selected.
Alaska 317.
Also there, here up. Dusty. Runway heading, climb and maintain 3000, Alaska 317. Heading 3000. That is like 500 feet, verify heading select. That's verified. VNAV, select flaps 5.
So we'll leave it there. The crew are then handed over. ATC will manage them in the go around for another approach. So the second video is not our video, and we're very grateful that it was shot. It's shot with a mobile phone in a flight simulator. And it was taken when Alaska Airlines were validating the SATCE system while they were actually visiting in Phoenix. So this is SATCE having been added to an existing simulator. And the camera pans around and we get a little view of an additional screen that we've added to the iOS. And I'll maybe talk through that. It's a little bit busy and chaotic. It was never designed to show anyone, but it's super authentic and it gives you an experience inside the simulator. So it's a pushback, a taxi, and a departure. And it's really a vanilla event. There are no particular threats from ATC or other traffic other than you're immersed in a busy environment. The airport is Phoenix.
Zero and 3 minutes, 1:19.2, 3021. Span into the 3.
American 111.
There's the iOS. You can see a transcript of everything that's being said by ATC and other traffic, and a map of moving traffic. I think they're just sorting out their pushback here. We've jumped now beyond pushback.
Oh, Bravo. That's where we go. By two.
Charlie 33.
Yeah, you're right. It's taking us toward the PH.
Moving from left to right. No problem.
Back the other way.
So
Do we go right turn? Japan Air 33 will pass behind the frontier. Golf, Bravo, Charlie 4.
you can also
So there
see
should be
other
Charlie
traffic
4.
in the air as well. It's already departed. See?
Bravo, you're on right now. Right. And you make a left on.
Ground, United 9
Sure,
Pacific,
that works.
Terminal 1662, with information Bravo, ready taxi with clearance.
United 959. Stand by. South ground. American 1.
So you can really see the airport does come alive.
Vector discretion. UPS 779.
Right, so we have a southwest departing ahead of us, which you can see just coming into the visual system here.
Did that go well? No. I don't see anything else. Ready? There he goes. Phoenix ground, Japan Air 33 for taxi.
Japan Air 33. Runway 25 right. Taxi via Delta 13. Indigo 13.
25 right, Delta 13, Echo 13, Japan Air 33.
So here's their taxi instructions.
Japan Air 33. Contact Phoenix Tower 120.9 hours.
On the bottom screen,
And then 33.
can you see another aircraft coming into land?
UPS 779.
That's going to land on a parallel runway when we're departing.
Phoenix Tower, Japan Air 33 is coming up on Delta 13 for 25 right.
Checking on tower. Now, we were probably late going on to tower frequency, so that's why we didn't hear Southwest get cleared for line up and take off.
Phoenix Tower, Japan Air 33, holding short, 25 right.
Japan Air 33. Phoenix Tower. Runway 25 right. Line up and wait.
Line up and wait, 25 right, Japan Air 33.
So we've got now line up.
Runway 25 right, wind calm, clear for takeoff.
Takeoff, 25 right, in there.
And takeoff clearance. Now, as we roll down the runway, watch to the left. It's a parallel runway and it's not traffic landing. The crew even pointed out because it's a bit of a distraction because it's novel. You don't see this in flight simulators.
Good liking it now. Trying to become the parallel.
There we go.
Car set.
There it is, coming to land. And we can also see the Southwest aircraft on the navigation display that's ahead of us. And we'll be able to hear its handover.
So 938, contact Phoenix departure.
D1.
There we go.
Turn right.
There it is, the visual.
You're on.
110. Phoenix.
So you can see how everything's coordinated, right? As you would expect.
6.8, Southwest 938. Phoenix 379, goodbye.
There we go. So take home number 2 is SATCE allows us to simulate new things. So we can now simulate threats from evidence, from data, from real world operations that come from both ATC and other traffic, or an evil combination where there is some errors from ATC and errors from other traffic combined. Just not possible to do today without simulated traffic and without fully simulated ATC. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you. So, adoption. So, as I said, the system has been available for almost 10 years at this point. And so far to date, 380 systems, slightly more than that, in fact, now have been sold. Currently, the split is 90% on the military side, and to my disappointment, only 10% on the commercial side, but that I think is about to change. But in the military side, the adoption has been across all types of aircraft, rotary, fixed wing, and unmanned aerial vehicles. Military training, ab initio, advanced and operational. So again, all classes of training that you could perhaps think. We also have Embry-Riddle that uses this type of technology. In fact, they've shown a significant improvement in time to first solo flight from using this technology. I think they quote somewhere between 30 and 50% reduction in time from entering their program to students' first solo flight. So they're using it for, again, ab initio. We also have a multi-pilot license as now finally adopted SATCE. First user there is Japan Airlines, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And we're in the airline evaluation phase. And in fact, Alaska Airlines is basically leading that charge and has been instrumental in a number of other airlines now significantly looking at this same technology. And in fact, even on the eVTOL side of our industry, which is still obviously emerging from the swamp, we've already had early adoption from Joby and Wisk. Our projection for 2026 is a change in the split. It'll be a 60 to 40% split, military to commercial. So we're going to see commercial is waking up, which I'm personally pleased to see because I've always believed it belonged firmly in the commercial aviation world, in addition to the military side. But I actually thought commercial might have been a bit sooner to kind of get the idea. Back to you.
So it might be bold to say, but we believe that SATCE is now inevitable. And none of us, of course, can know what's going to happen tomorrow or in the future. And barring an economic slowdown or something, or yes, exactly, another COVID, then that might be a problem. But we are at the point now where we're really at the breaking wave of this in commercial flight training. We've seen steady adoption in military and adoption, as Neil mentioned, earlier in military than commercial pilot training, but we really are now beyond the tipping point. And I think that's because you and I have been working in it for so many years. We get to see all the signs and we get to see little changes here, there, and changes in attitude. and we're now well beyond the tipping point. It's inevitable, which is super exciting to say, and it's taken too many years to get here, but we are absolutely here. So, okay, a few quick thoughts about aviation safety. What is the link between increasing the fidelity in the simulator and actually safer real-world operations? And this is if you like, a logical route that we should all be familiar with. The thing that is new is that we are adding ATC, and we're adding traffic, and we're adding full airport operations into the simulator for the first time. But this route is absolutely the route that we have been following, if you like, for the last 40 plus years. In that we increase the fidelity in the simulator, that leads to greater immersion. We're now able to increase the complexity of the simulator to better match real world by delivering more realistic workloads and threats, especially now from ATC and traffic. We hope that that delivers more effective training, and that transfers to an increase in their pilot performance and their resilience. That is, if you like, our contribution or is expressed in safer real-world operations.
This is me again.
Over to you.
So MPL. So Japan Airlines was the first adopter of using SATCE in their training devices. Now, this was the initiator of my interest. Remember, 2005, this was what Ed Cook was talking about when he was referring to the ICAO 9868 edition 1, which was, I think, published in 2006. But that's where he referenced this. Now, despite that happening, it took until 2025 to see this first MPL program using the technology that he described, which feels rather sad, really. I mean, that was a long, long time. The vision was there. Admittedly, the technology was struggling in the early years, but as I've said, we've had this technology now for almost 10 years as available as a product. But Japan Airlines, and you can see some of the nice words that they kind of wrote about their experience. They've now graduated 3 classes using this technology. So in their second phase of training, where they move into multi-crew operations, 100% of their training is done in the simulator with SATCE as the source of all their ATC and traffic experience. And that evidence from their experiences has been incredibly helpful to us to see how things like accent tolerance of the speech recognition is extremely good now. The technology is very powerful. In fact, when we first started with the technology, speech recognition was a big challenge. Now we don't even think about it. It's just functional, it just works. And interestingly enough, we developed that technology ourselves, because what you see on the internet, we can't plug our simulators into the internet. Nobody wants to do that. So it's all locally hosted, and it's all technology that we wrote ourselves, which was quite a challenge. It was quite interesting. The tech that we could get access to was just not sufficiently able to cope with how pilots talk. Some of you are pilots here, I'm sure, and you kind of talk a little funny sometimes. So we had to take care of that. We've done that. But yeah, in fact, Japan Airlines originally was using a couple of business jets and flying their students around with headsets on to train them how to do ATC, which was incredible to think about how much that cost, the risks, and also the fact that the training outcomes for those flights was never guaranteed. They didn't know what they were going to get. They just listened and were supposed to absorb by osmosis, I suppose. But as you and I well understand, when you speak, you learn how to do something. Your language is an interactive thing. If you're just listening, I don't think you really learn. And that was really what Japan Airlines kind of brought to us, was that we need to do this better. So they're really happy with how it's worked out.
Now, there are many articles now being published by users of SATCE, and this is one example of a few from Embry-Riddle. And you mentioned it previously, Neil, that they are seeing a reduced time for training cadets to proficiency, which is just great. Now, there's quite a bit of research going on with SATCE at the moment, both commercial and military. Probably the largest program is this a multi-year FAA research program. Both Neil and myself are involved in it, and it's super exciting to see it take place. We've kind of designed, or the FAA have designed 3 phases. We've already passed phase 1. We're now into phase 2, which will be with Alaska Airlines, using their professional crews in the simulator, exposed to both scenarios that contain SATCE and scenarios that don't contain SATCE, and comparing the difference. The ultimate goal of the FAA is to understand the efficacy, how effective is SATCE, what is the impact of SATCE, and how does that affect how we qualify simulators and how we approve training programs with SATCE in. And the focus there is all on commercial pilot training for airlines. There's also been some UK RAF funded research, and that is now entering, I believe, phase 2, correct? So that's also interesting. These are small scale trials at the moment, but they do show evidence of effect. In fact, interestingly, when you add in both ATC and traffic together, the workload, the measured workload of the students in the simulator goes up. That's kind of to be expected, I guess. An interesting finding from the first publication of from the UK RAF was that pilot performance with SATCE actually falls. And that's another very interesting thought if we think about globally. At the moment, we are licensing pilots as proficient, measured in a simulator, without a realistic operational environment. So that's quite a serious thought, really, about the potential impact of this technology. There's also ongoing academic research from Embry-Riddle and Purdue University. All of it is helping us understand the efficacy, how effective is SATCE. It informs both regulators, but also actually developers of the technology, like ASTi. We're able to take the output from that research and feed it into our development and help mitigate and improve how this technology is going to be implemented. So I thought we could step back for this one. It's not really a take-home, it's more of a question for you. We know that we're going to have and face quite a lot of challenges rolling this technology out at scale, right? At the moment, it is an emerging technology, but it does have the potential to be on every single simulator. It's useful for simulators with XR technology, procedural simulators where you can add communications, and it's certainly useful for the highest fidelity simulators. So we're going to face lots of challenges ahead, not only improving the technology, the technology is already mature, and it'll only get better. I totally agree with you, Neil, especially with the integration of more and more AI. But fundamentally, please ask yourself and answer for yourself, is it a good idea? Is it worth us collectively as an industry giving this more focus and investment? So I'm going to run you through at lightning speed, because already 10 to 7, just the regulatory framework around SATCE. At the moment, SATCE is not, the high level message is SATCE at the moment is not required. But we are getting to the point where the regulatory framework is forming. So SATCE is mentioned in Doc 9868. It is actually required by ICAO in that document for devices used for students on the multi-crew pilot license or studying for or gaining that license. the technical requirements and a tiny bit of guidance is also included in document 9625. EASA Part FCL for the MPL matches pretty much 9868 in terms of its requirements for SATCE. And SATCE has been included most recently in the draft, because it's not yet live, let's say, the draft CSFSTD by EASA, and that is the certification standards for flight training devices. And we also have a mature industry standard for SATCE. This was developed over many years by lots of different organizations and is likely to become the consensus industry standard, we hope, that is referred to by the FAA, and also in forthcoming editions of ICAO 9625. Now that, of course, is the FAA's decision and is ICAO's decision, but this is a live pretty much a live document. We are iterating it further by reforming an international working group on SATCE. And if your organization is not already aware of this and you think others in your organization or other people you know in the industry might be interested to join, then please contact us. Our emails are rather oddly formatted there, but they are there at the bottom. And we're looking to meet next year, actually for 18 months, starting the beginning of next year, and look at the list of organizations already supporting this. We have major airlines in here. In fact, JetBlue sent me an email today to say they want to join in as well. So we have a really nice situation where SATCE is being shaped and formed now by training providers and by airlines, not by the technology. Technology is always the cart, and training needs is always the horse. So we've kind of got things in a really healthy situation here where the training community is starting to lead and shape the technology and tell us what they want. So I want to say in the next takeaway that our regulatory framework at the moment constrains innovation. And this has been a theme right the way through today's conference, actually. I think maybe 4 or 5 different presenters have said almost the same thing. And we were not coordinated. We just, Neil and I created this slide not knowing what was going to be said. So what happened over the last 10, 15 years of traveling around globally, both Neil and I experienced this, is we went to airlines and training providers and flight schools, and we advocated for SATCE, we showed them what it was. And almost always, the people who were in charge of training, so the training leadership, the curriculum design teams, they wanted SATCE. They asked the finance department, can we finance this? And the finance asked one question which killed it, which is, well, is it mandated? And of course, the training leaders say, well, no, not yet. We think it's coming. It's really good. We'd like it, please. But the answer is no. And so we have this, rather stringent system that is actually limiting innovation. Now, I've put a problem here forward as a takeaway. So maybe we ought to think up some ideas about what needs to change. So firstly, I think the regulatory system, we need to breathe flexibility into it. It needs to be more flexible so it can accommodate emerging technologies. And also a posture from regulators globally of encouraging innovation, of fostering it, and even providing us, by that I mean industry, with the focus from evidence, from safety, for what are those things that need our focus most and would have maximum impact. Nothing's going to work without dedicated funding and ring-fenced funding. And maybe we can think of creative things like competitions and recognition, whatever it takes for us to have a more fostering, innovative environment and culture. Really, I'm talking about a systemic issue here and a global issue, but it does need cultural change. So at the moment, we're kind of stuck in rigid rules and this concept of minimum standards, and we really need to be moving over to a culture where we're embracing innovation beyond minimum standards. And Neil and I can only relate our lived experience, right? And our lived experience has been pretty painful at trying to get this technology to market. But we are finally here, and it's a really happy ending to the story. So these are a few ideas that we've put on the page, but what are your ideas? You probably have got much better ones. So we finish thinking about regulation with this slide, not our words, words from a director of training of a major US airline. We simply can't sit around waiting for regulators to react to an accident. Safety is the reason we train, and it's obvious we're missing something in our simulators, and SATCE fixes this. So we have nearly run out of time. So I'm going to dance through this next section. Is that okay with everyone? Yep. Okay, right. Fast. So we're looking here now into part 3, which is a look ahead. What is going to be the global impact of SATCE? I think in flight safety, we are looking at 3 hot topics, if you like, and 3 particularly impactful areas where SATCE can have a particularly high impact, and that is runway safety, including runway incursions, improving TCAS. In fact, I think SATCE is going to have a dramatic change on how we train TCAS, because you're always flying with other traffic, and that is not the case today. And also, for the first time, we're able to train some of the hazards around ground collisions. And that has a financial impact as well as a safety case really behind it. Now, takeaway number 6, so we're at 6 of 7, is that SATCE is something that we can do. And by we, I mean our industry, flight training and flight simulation. And I'd argue it's something we should do, we ought to do, and actually falls under our responsibility. It's one way we can do our bit, if you like, put simply, to contribute to the larger aviation ecosystem, or aviation safety ecosystem. SATCE is already in use with XR, and these two are really ideally paired together. We can incorporate communications training into procedural training. The fact that the ATC is no longer role played by the instructor means that the instructor, he or she, can be moved away physically from the device, or even monitor multiple devices in parallel, which is already happening actually, yeah. And with the growth and pairing of SATCE and XR, we get all of the known benefits of XR as well. This is a slide provided kindly by Salient, and it was something that, a concept that was referred to earlier in the conference today. This is a typical LOFT profile. It's the concept of a more intelligent IOS, where the instructor is able to not only pre-plan threats and challenges, but also adjust them in real time. So it's a good example of adaptive training. And I want to highlight the fact that now ATC and also traffic, or even that evil combination of ATC and traffic threats together, can be put into an intelligent iOS of the future like this. And lastly, SATCE is going to have a pretty significant impact on training matrix. Now, there's some obvious things like communications metrics, like optional transcripts. What did the crew say? What did ATC say to the crew? Were there errors, omissions, and how standard was their phraseology? All that kind of thing. That's all useful data that we can get out of SATCE, which we couldn't get before, and it's objective data, which is useful. But perhaps not so obvious, and perhaps even more powerful, is this idea that SATCE adds context. So now, let's say a training event happens. We know at that point in time, what was the cleared status of the own ship? What procedure were they flying? Where were they in that procedure? What was the traffic level around them or traffic threat? How busy was the radio? We can judge things like workload much more usefully. And SATCE adds a whole load of contextual data that we just didn't have before. It means that we are able to deliver much more meaningful data from the simulator, and that can be fed back into training programs and can be also compared with real-world operations. So on to the final take-home. Hooray. Having unpacked a bit of the history here, current adoption, and looking forward to the future, our hope is that, like us, you have maybe thought a little bit more about SATCE, and that it's perhaps bigger than you initially thought and more significant than you initially thought. It surprises me almost every day how big the subject is and how broad it is and how much wide impact it has. And we can talk about human factors, we can talk about CBTA, we can talk about EBT, we can talk about CRM, threat and error management, et cetera, and it impacts, and the instructor role, that changes dramatically. All of these things are impacted. So on to a question for you, Slido. So if you can get out your mobile phones or other devices, I guess. The question is how significant do you see SATCE impacting the future of flight training? And thank you very much for playing along with this, everyone.
I have a question before I vote.
Go for it.
Yep.
Yes. Oh, we need a microphone. One sec. No problem.
You've jumped the gun. Oh, yeah, I don't want to vote yet.
You want to vote after you've asked the question. Fair enough.
Take questions while the voting is underway.
Right.
There we go.
Can you hear me now? Yeah,
Yes.
good evening. John
Yep.
Gibby. I work for Leonardo Helicopters and I'm presenting tomorrow, and we're developing ship air integration modeling simulation. For the last 5 or 6 years, UK's been back in the market at carrier strike group activities. And you mentioned about the 90% piece. So how can SATCE aid training for when you've got potentially fixed wing and rotoring aircraft operating off a QEC carrier and also supporting ships in that carrier strike group? So you can have F-35, you can have autonomous, uncrewed air systems and rotary systems as well. So my question is are you looking at that SATCE piece? Is there that interest there?
So you're looking more at operational mission type.
Correct.
So far that's not really been a focus.
No.
We've been trying to cover the standard ATC environment that everybody has to operate in. Most of the military customers that have come to us have said, look, our crews have to operate in the civil aviation ATC environment. And we have to do, in fact, a lot of them said, we train at our military airports, we learn all the local procedures for that, and they're not really very standard. So we need to learn how to do it properly. And they often use those words. So most of those military customers so far have been of that nature. And that's not to say that we can't do more advanced things in sort of what I call more the mission environment, but I think that's probably not a focus that we're going to see in the short term, because we've got an awful lot of other ground to cover in the meantime. And that's still a big challenge for us, is we're going to see large-scale airline adoption. That's going to bring that set of challenges itself. So we have to be careful with how we focus our time and our capabilities.
But to answer your question conceptually, yes. Because if you think about all of these different types of aircraft you've got in that space, to us, to a SATCE system, there's just an entity with a set of performance and you've also got air traffic control, albeit ship-based and maybe based elsewhere remotely. That is no different really than what we're doing. Please vote.
Let this guy's finish what they had planned.
No, that is it. We're now moving on to questions. So, okay. Yeah. So it's very interesting that over 50% of us now think this is a game changer. So I feel like we've half done our job. So thank you. Let's go sit.
Thank you very much. Absolutely excellent. Over the 20 years since the presentation you referenced, I've sat in rooms, seeing you two talking about SATCE, and it's gone from nobody's really listening or understanding to everyone's a bit sympathetic, but we've got no money or requirements, to finally see it actually happening and genuinely happening and being used and the benefit being seen is great. If I could offer a small, from my perspective, some of you in the room know I fly helicopters, just general aviation. Learning to hover the damn thing is quite hard. The next hardest thing is talking on the radio. I learned to fly at Redhill. It's embedded into Gatwick Zone. Gatwick is a very, very busy airport. If you cross London, it's also quite busy. Thank you. You get interference as well on the radio. So, for instance, I want to cross the London zone and fly my helicopter, handling, no real workload. Radio, trying to call them, bit of a workload, especially someone in the cockpit who's going, oh, is that Fulham football stadium down there or whatever? And then you finally maybe get your call in, like, oh, the radio's busy and you can't get your call in because you're not a bit used to it. So now you find you're approaching the zone and you're not going to fly where you thought you're going to fly because you know you're going to hold. Now you're looking for the hold and you're still trying to talk and then they won't give you your clearance. Then you can be cleared. Can you see this traffic over here coming in this direction into London City? And the workload is actually quite high. And that workload is never really going to go down very much. And also, I hear so many general aviation people who clearly did not learn how to fly around Redhill and get a bit good at radio, which I think for general aviation, I'm quite good at radio. And those guys create absolute effing havoc. And they don't fly through London because they know they'd never be allowed to on the radio. So they're congesting everywhere around the London zone. Anyway, so my first question is, have you done anything to improve general aviation's quality of radio or even participate in the radio exams, radio licenses that people have to get? There was a little bit of mention with Embry-Riddle, maybe.
In fact, yes, we do. We have a secondary product that's not the full-up SATCE environment, but it's a phraseology trainer that allows you to practice radio calls using the same core technology, but in an online sense, in a more kind of scripted environment. But that's incredibly helpful to that sort of trainee that's trying to, get a good basis in learning how to do radio. And I think that's something that's not done very well, especially for native English speakers. In fact, I go to a lot of conferences where they talk about native English speakers are perhaps some of the worst offenders on the radio because they think they know how to do it. Well, they know how to speak English, but that's not the same as learning how to use the correct phraseology, correct terminology, etc. So I think
bearing in mind the drinks are waiting, with trepidation, because we have to finish at 8 o'clock with the drinks, I invite Ian Strawn to ask a question.
Just very quickly, I'm an ex-military guy. Which are the leading militaries in this?
So probably the lead military is the US Navy. They've adopted SATCE, in fact, at all levels of their training programs. They started with an ab initio training program using VR sleds, and now they're putting them into their operational trainers, their OFTs, their advanced training programs. All of them are now adopting it large scale. Behind the Navy, the Air Force is now coming up. I think they've realized that they kind of got left behind, but the US Air Force, some of their wide body, KC-46, RC-135, all of those platforms now have our systems on them. We've also got a large system installed with the Royal Australian Air Force. That's on their, I think it's the Air 5428 program, which is PC-21. ESAIL and I forget where the other one is, on the other coast. But they're probably the the programs that spring to mind, but there's also an extensive unmanned aerial vehicle, US Air Force, the MQ-9 program. That's a huge, and in fact, that's probably one of the biggest deployments of SATCE, which might seem strange, but their operators have to fly through controlled airspace. So when those aircraft depart, and now they depart from the US, they used to depart from, I don't know, strips of sand somewhere, but now they're flying out of the US, they're air refueling the MQ-9s, and then off they go and do whatever they do. But in that departure and arrival, they have to come through controlled airspace, and those operators have to use full standard phraseology through the airspace. And so that's one of the biggest challenges for those kind of operators, is they don't get a lot of experience in, they're not actually flying, they're on the ground in control stations, but they're still interacting as if they are in the controlled airspace, which...
A couple more minutes of questions. If someone could bring the microphone. Amy, hello, Amy. Thank you. If you could bring the microphone down the front. While she's bringing it down, I'll take a question through Slido. It's from Anders Olsen. Can SATCE be used in the training of new ATC personnel to generate a load for their training?
That's interesting, because we've actually steered away from that sort of region of training, because it's really it's quite a different environment. ATC training is a little bit different, and we feel that if we were to move into another market area, we would be diffusing our capability to focus on what we've been looking at for, well, the near 20 years that we've been doing this. So for now, we're focused very much on pilot training from the cockpit out.
I can add that there are elements of SATCE, of the technology, that can be applied for air traffic control training. But as Neil says, that in itself is another large market, and would divert focus away from training pilots.
Yep.
Gentleman at the front.
Thank you for the good presentation. I need to know, other than the 3 factors that were shown in where this technology can be applicable, is that confined to only those 3 factors? Or let's say that if a pilot is flying an aircraft, a commercial aircraft, airlines in whichever the country it is, and due to huge rain, fog, so there'll be too much traffic flowing in the air, such incidents, and also let's say some engine failure or
Absolutely.
takeoff, can all these be simulated during this training?
Great question. Yes, and in fact, one of the things I don't think we really addressed too much is how the system is entirely fully dynamic. So it will cope with whatever the instructor puts in front of it. There's a little bit of work that we need to do to kind of make sure that we've got the correct procedures in place. But weather diversions, aircraft failures, malfunctions, engine mayday calls, all these kind of things, we already support a lot of that already. That's a growing capability that we're building into the system as we move forward. We're really driven by customer demands, but if it happens in the real world with an ATC involvement or another traffic situation, we can put that into the environment.
Did you reach out to Director General of Civil Aviation in India about this technology, and what are their response to it? In my opinion, I'm very favor of those technologies which save lives in the micro level to the macro level. Me being in a scientific and specialist grade level right now, I fully support this. But of course, I'm not marketing anything, but to save lives. Did you reach out to Director General of Civil Aviation during Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's regime or Narendra Modi's regime? What was the response?
So far, we haven't. And we've really been attacking this from the airlines inwards, if you like. So we've been talking to a lot of potential customers from airlines direct. Now, a lot of those have then taken that concept and have started to introduce those to their authorities. So, for instance, Japan Airlines did exactly that for their program. They came to us, we talked to them, explained what we could do. They took that back to the JCAP, the CAA for their region. They showed them what the technology was, explained it, showed them videos of it, talked about it, and then that program was then approved by JCAB as part of the program for the MPL. So that's kind of how it seems to work best. Somebody that really wants it takes it in, explains why they want it, As a marketing exercise, I'm not sure it really helps for us to do that very much because it's got to be driven by a customer that wants this. I don't think the authorities are going to be pushing this. So far, we haven't seen anybody do that, and it doesn't matter where we are in the world. But it's come from a training need or a safety case. These kind of things, they're definitely happening. We're seeing different reasons for wanting this technology. I mean, the most compelling for me is the safety case. But there are also people that look at this and say, well, the financial case can be made for this. If we reduce the number of go-arounds, we reduce, I don't know, ground collisions. You've only got to have one ground collision, and that gets you an awful lot of SATCE systems, to be honest. So it's many and varied, but we would be happy to talk to those type of authorities and would welcome it. But we just haven't had that need to do that yet.
I feel like I'm on the radio trying to get into London traffic. Yeah, we'll take two more questions in the room if they're fairly quick. But before Andy asks his, we've got an upvoted Slido question, so we'd better take that one. It is from Anonymous, that well-known questioner. I understand how SATCE could have a huge impact on MPL programs where the majority of your training is done in an FSTD, but most training facilities still follow a conventional CPL program in which students get exposed to actual ATC and airspace navigation. I think we covered some of this in the presentation. So the question is, so would it be accepted globally, do you think?
Well, is the question whether SATCE will be accepted globally, or maybe the question is...
Accepted to have SATCE in an MPL program rather than what currently is done with CPL, which is, as you described, sticking people on airplanes with headsets.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the cost reasoning behind using it for MPL was very compelling. I think the training outcome side of things is even more compelling because with SATCE, you can build a scenario with an expected kind of sequence of events that will happen through the training exercise itself. So you can build in the idea that you're going to have a weather diversion in lesson 6. In Japan Airlines case, they have 15, I think it is, different scenarios that they can present, but then also have multiple options within them. So the crew don't necessarily know what they're going to get when they come to scenario 3. I know you pilots tend to talk to each other about what the training cycle is for this year's AQP, for example. We in fact have a United pilot as a consultant, and he says that the way it works there is that the training cycle comes up, the first crew that come in, go through the whatever the scenario is, they all get on WhatsApp and say, well, this is what happened and this is what you're going to face. And it's a little bit kind of, cheating, I think. But with what we've seen from Japan Airlines, they build in variability to the scenarios. So they're kind of all following a similar path, but not necessarily exactly the same one. So the crews can't kind of cheat and sort of tell each other what's going to come in any of the given scenarios. So MPO, I think, is very compelling.
Did you use your voice for some of the SATCE? Because it's so hard to break in on the radio.
I'm not going to say. But
we do need to wind this up fairly quickly.
The answer is yes. Neil is off on an air traffic controller.
Andy, we could get one more in at the front. Otherwise, I know you've been trying to put your hand up, but we'll take that one out to the drinks break. And I've got one very short question on here, because you can't be as thirsty as I am.
Yeah, right. So a good deal of what you guys have covered tonight. I'm going to say perhaps isn't necessarily SATCE, but what it is ASTi's product or ASTi's interpretation of SATCE. So, and of course that's based on the guidance that's in the ARINC document. So how many other SATCE products are there on the market available that meet what's in the ARINC 439 document?
Well, 10 years ago, there was about 5 or 6 SATCEs internationally being developed. And now we are down to perhaps 2, and I do know of another one in the UK, so perhaps 3. So there are a small number of vendors globally, but I expect that number to dramatically increase now because we are at the point where people start to realize what this is and realize the potential benefit. But that is not a good reason for us not to roll SATCE out, just because there's 2 suppliers, or even if there was 1.
Very good. It's easier to break in when you're talking. I'm going to, make this the last one if we take the other outside, because it has been sent in from remotely. 90% to 10% split military civil to date. Is this a reflection of the architectural differences in military simulation, e.g. this HLA, that lends well to incorporating third-party entities? You have 10 seconds to answer, Neil.
No, the reason is there's no regulation on the military side. So the military is not constrained. They can do what they want and they have money. So they saw the opportunity and went for it.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. If we could thank them all. Close now and go through for drinks. Those of you who are at home, you have to go to the kitchen and make your own. I hope you've enjoyed it. See you at the conference tomorrow if you're part of the conference.